came to schmooze. That's why they don't want me, you know. Torah. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Shabbat shalom. What did they do to this damn thing? Nice to see all of you. Wow, Jews. Okay. Good morning. Boker tov. Shabbat shalom. It is Shabbos of the Super Bowl. Boston, we say Hallel this morning. Actually, if you're from Boston, you say Hallel. If you're from Philly, you can say Kaddish. Yeah. Because as we learned last year at the Holy Super Bowl, it doesn't matter how many points you're ahead at halftime, they're going to beat you. I mean, because the Lord has anointed Tom Brady. Any man who's the best player, the best quarterback in the history of the game and married to the hottest supermodel in the world and works for the most generous Jewish owner in the league, you got to know that something's going on here. I mean, boy, oh boy, oh boy. Sherry, how was it? Was it fun? Did you meet him? Did you meet Brady?
Yeah, I didn't meet Brady. He was on Wednesday.
Sherry was there because she works for the NFL. As you can tell, she's a linebacker for the Packers. Yeah.
But I learned a lot about. I was with the players as well as all the CEOs of
Yeah.
the Fortune 100 companies speaking, and what I learned a lot about was what we see and what actually is.
Yeah. Very different. Well, you'll tell us about that. Yeah. Thank you for the little video. She sent me a video of Cam Jordan, who's a man roughly the size of the synagogue. I mean, right? It's a 390. And that's after the diet. I mean, I've been at 390, but that doesn't look like him, you know. So come in. Make room. There's plenty of room. Pull a chair up. Come in. So we're delighted everybody's here. Shabbat shalom. It's really good to see all of you, and hope that it is a sweet Shabbos together. A couple of announcements so people know what's going on in the shul. Following our study, there's a lovely bar mitzvah and a nice lunch this morning, and everyone is certainly invited to share that. Parsha group after that, studying Parsha's Yitro. Following that, this coming week, on Wednesday night, the College of Jewish Studies is meeting. We're doing a survey of Jewish history. You don't have to have come to any of the other sessions because they're relatively independent. We're now into the modern Judaism. And this week, we're going to welcome Professor Stephen Ross from USC, who just wrote a really, really interesting book. It's about the Nazi plot to infiltrate Hollywood in the 30s and the Jewish sort of activists who undid that plot. It is a terrific spy story. It happens to be true. It really happened right here in LA. And there are people, and remember some of these, mostly descendants of people who knew these stories. Stephen uncovered the documents and the whole story. It is a remarkable story. Also, in terms of Jewish history, about the awakening of Jewish American power. But really a very interesting spy story. So that's this Wednesday at 7 o'clock, free cookies. Free cookies. You can't do better than that. Torah and free cookies.
You spoke at HAU on that.
Yeah, very interesting guy.
It's a great thing.
Yeah, he's a great speaker.
Except that he whitewashed Roosevelt and I.
Well, we'll get to that.
I choked him and then I'm arrested.
Right.
Can't go anywhere but you.
I know. Thank God. It's what's it called? It has this long name about the plot of the Nazis against Hollywood and how the Jews undid it. It's a really, say it again, Jackie?
Hitler in Los Angeles, how Jews foiled Nazi plots against Hollywood and America.
Hitler in Los Angeles. Hitler in Hollywood, okay? And then Friday night is Rimonim, beautiful musical service at 6:30. Everybody's invited. Come at 6 for a nosh. Next Shabbos morning, of course, there's Torah study. The end of the month, February 26th, we're welcoming the Jewish Republican Coalition's bringing Larry Elder, very interesting fellow on the radio. Everyone's invited to come hear that. And the last announcement is that we're taking a trip to Israel in March. Some of you are going with me. We do this every 3, 4, 5 years. It's a thinking person's trip. It's not a tourist trip. It's a great trip if you want to understand Israel and the issues that shape Israel. because we are meeting with the people who are really the people who are thinking about what Israel ought to be, what it can be, and visiting places that will give us a sense of the issues that shape Israel. It's a one-week trip. You can go early and stay a few days in Israel, stay late after a few days in Israel, but it's a one-week intensive trip, a lot of learning together. We'd love to have you come along, and we eat in great restaurants. Israel is a great food place now. So please come. If anyone wants to come, there are flyers in the hallway. Alana Zimmerman, who works in my office, has the itinerary. She'd love to have you come along with us. It's a wonderful trip. We're going to go up north and meet the commander of Israel's northern defenses and talk about Syria, ISIS, Lebanon, Russia. And then we'll go south and talk to ultra-Orthodox Jews. And we're going to go to Ramallah and meet members of the Palestinian leadership. We're going to really see where Israel is in the world today. So please come with us. We'd love to have you along. Okay? Shabbat Shalom, everybody well? Good, good. Let's begin, not in this week's Torah portion, but in a Torah portion we won't get to for some months. So we're going to be on page 432, but I'd like you to go to Ki Tavo, and I'll tell you where that is. Page 1140. Page 1140, 1140. Okay, you ready? This Parsha, this is in Deuteronomy, so we won't get to this till the late summer, early fall. And this is the section that describes, or you can see the beginning, Ki tavo el haaretz. When you enter the land, when you arrive, or you enter the land that God is giving you, and you possess it and you settle it. Moshe's about to die, he's about to send his people into the land, and he gives them something to do. When you enter the land, this is what you're going to do. You shall take some of the first fruits of the soil which you harvest, and you'll go to the Lord. You'll go to the place that God establishes as a worship space. And look at verse 3. You'll go to the priest in charge at the time, and you'll say to him, I acknowledge this day before the Lord their God that I have entered the land that God swore to our ancestors. And the priest will take the basket and set it down in front of the altar. And you will recite the following. You will recite the following. In Hebrew, Arami Oved Avi. My father was a fugitive Aramean. He went down to Egypt with meager numbers, sojourned there, and became a great and populous nation. The Egyptians dealt harshly with us and oppressed us. They imposed heavy labor upon us. We cried to the Lord, the God of our fathers, and the Lord heard our cries, saw our plight and our misery and our oppression. The Lord freed us from Egypt with a mighty hand, by an outstretched arm and awesome power, by signs and miracles. He brought us to this place, and gave us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. Wherefore I now bring the first fruits of the land, of the soil which you, O Lord, have given me. This is a ritual. This is a litany, a formula that you're to recite. Because it's a formula and because it's a ritual, it is believed by many scholars to be the oldest section of the Torah. In a certain way, like this is the Torah and everything else was written around it. You all know this, because this is the core of the Pesach Haggadah. When you get to the Magid section of the Seder, that's after the kid asks the questions and your brother-in-law screams, when do we eat, for the fourth time, and somebody spills the first glass of wine onto the tablecloth, this is what you say. Arami Oved Avi, my father was a fugitive Aramean. And what the rabbis of the Talmud did was take this formula and expand it. So that each phrase, they add all kinds of midrash, all kinds of imaginative expansion to this. This is a very important formula, but something's missing here. Look at this formula again. Look at what it tells us, and look at what it doesn't tell us, right? My father was a fugitive Aramean. We're a fugitive. We came from nowhere, and we were wandering. Aramean means everything east of the Jordan River, okay? He went down to Egypt with meager numbers. He lived there and became a great nation. The Egyptians dealt harshly with us and oppressed us and imposed heavy labor upon us. There are three different ways of describing how miserable it was. So in a formula that's very economical, that's very frugal with its words, There's 3 different phrases to describe it's pretty bad down there. And then we cried to the Lord, the God of our fathers, and the Lord heard our plea, saw our plight, our misery, and our oppression. 4 words to describe that. You see how that works? And the Lord freed us from Egypt with a mighty hand. So what is this the story of? This is the story of our political liberation. This is the story of our material liberation, right? We were stuck in Egypt. We were slaves. And this God pulled us out of slavery. This is how we got to be a politically free people. This is a story of political liberation, material liberation. We moved from here to there. And the miracle of the story, rather the uniqueness of the story, the surprise of the story is that a God would enter history on the side of slaves. Gods don't typically do that. First of all, gods are not remote. Gods are local. And this is a God who acts in history far away from the land of his people. But more than that, this is a God who enters history on the side of slaves. Who ever heard of such a thing? God doesn't enter history on the side of slaves. God enters history on the side of conquerors. And even if you imagine that this is a God who enters history on the side of slaves, then you would imagine that the charge would be, conquer the world for me. Go, I am your tribal God. You will be my people. Make war on the world and conquer it. And that's not here either. Very interesting statement. But most of all, there's something missing. Here you have the political liberation of a people from slavery to freedom, from a remote land to its promised land, to its ancestral land, from the oppression of slavery to the opportunities of it. But there's something missing. What's missing? Well, Moses is missing. That's true. The whole thing is God, right? No Moses in this. True. Well, that's what's missing. But now think about what that means, right? What's missing from this is political liberation isn't enough. To move a people from slavery to freedom, from exile to homeland, from a position of being oppressed to a position of being in power isn't enough. There's something else that has to happen for this liberation, for the liberation that Torah has in mind to really happen, to really occur. And that is the people have to change. It's not enough to change people from the outside. You've got to change people from the inside. You've got to liberate them, as it were, spiritually or morally. Something else has to change. And it's missing from here. This statement is all about the political liberation. And it ends with this beautiful statement, and here I am, in the land of milk and honey. Here I am, the land of milk and honey. And certainly that's one voice of the Torah. The miracle of liberation was we moved from Egypt to Canaan. We moved from the house of bondage to the land of milk and honey. We moved from oppression to freedom. That's one of the great miracles. But there's another one that's missing. And that's what the Torah is now going to enter into in our narrative, in today's narrative, which is, and how do I change the people from the inside? How do I create a different kind of people? How do I change the collective moral life of this people? That's going to be the next task. And it's missing from here. And you can start asking, why is it missing from here? I mean, you could say, for example, it's missing from here because this was one voice. One voice said, political liberation is enough. But there's another voice that says, no, I want something else. Now, we know how God took them out of the land of Egypt. 10 plagues, smashing the Pharaoh. You remember that narrative. You remember all of that. The question now is, how do you change the people from the inside? How do you liberate a people from the inside? How do you liberate the spirits of people? How do you disengage them from all kinds of internal slavery to make them into free-souled people? How do you create souls? How do you create a collective life? That's a whole different problem. In many ways, that's a much more difficult problem, right? Freeing them from the chains of their oppression is one thing. Freeing them from the chains of their obsessions is a different thing. Freeing them from a narrow moral vision to a wider moral vision, that's a much more difficult process. How do you do it? How do you do it? Can you use the same special effects that you used to destroy the Pharaoh? We're going to find that. That's a question, by the way. Would it, enough plagues and magic tricks and will that do it? Will that change people, or do people change in a different way? And that's going to be the question today. So I want you to be surprised. I mean, I always tell you this. The problem with the Torah is you've read it before, so you know what's in it. It's like seeing the Wizard of Oz over again. I mean, oh, here come the flying monkeys. No. You've got to be surprised. I want you to be surprised, because if we didn't have, if this were the Torah story, and the Torah told us about how we got out of Egypt and how we arrived in the land, done. Been a shorter Torah for one thing, easier to read on Shabbos morning. What's this stuff in the middle? And by the way, it's everything from this point till the middle of the book of Numbers. So it's about 50%, 40% of the Torah. This sets a different task. The task here is, how do you liberate people from the inside? How do you give them a moral vision of the life they ought to be living? Yeah, Pop. Oh gosh, why do you do this to me? Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to welcome my father back to Torah study. I got these two troublemakers, and I can't contradict either one of them. I can't contradict him because he's my father and my teacher, and I can't contradict him because he's my teacher and my rabbi. Just thank you, God. All right, go ahead. Make my life miserable. Go ahead. Yeah. It's all right. So go ahead. Give me the case.
They've got to change the whole outlook and the whole way of doing things.
Which means if what, Pop? Go ahead. Finish the thought, because it's a really important thought. No, you're doing fine. You're doing fine. Which means if you were to liberate them politically and give them their own country, if you gave them the powers of sovereignty, without changing the internal life of that people, without restructuring their internal narrative, first of all, you create something very dangerous. You create something very dangerous, right? If you offer a population political sovereignty, political power, political freedom, material freedom, without offering them a spiritual vision of what to use freedom for, of what kind of moral collective they can become, okay? Right? You end up with something that's very difficult, very, very dangerous, right? First of all, you end up with dictatorships, because they will listen to the first strong, charismatic leader who comes along and says, our tribe, okay? So this is a very interesting balance. I mean, we get very political here about external power, political power, military, material power on the one hand, and moral vision. And what happens if they're not married to each other? And that is a very interesting point of view. So the Palestinians are one case, right? And every other nation of the world. Jews are another case, right? Right, this was the argument between Herzl and Chada'am. Herzl wanted to produce political power, political liberation, because he was concerned about the safety of the Jewish people in the world. He had visions of Auschwitz in 1904. He had visions in 1897. That's why he killed himself because he knew that if he could get Jews out of Europe, he could save them. He thought, by the way, incidentally, that it would start in France, not in Germany. But he saw it coming. He saw it coming. And he knew that if he could get Jews out of Europe, he could save them. Chada'am, and he was right, by the way. Chada'am said, you have to create the people from the inside first. You have to free this people from the inside. You've got to give them a moral vision for which to strive. Because if you don't give them a moral vision for which to strive, either they'll collapse, they won't have the courage to continue to fight for their own freedom, or worse, they'll end up as a monster. You end up as a monster because you end up pursuing tribal visions of power, conquest, domination, destruction, rather than moral visions of power, moral visions of what to do with power. It's a very interesting point of view. Yes, please.
How about making them responsible for it?
Well, that's a problem, you see, because if you've been living as a slave, you've never had any sense of responsibility for your future. In fact, on the contrary, the future is the one thing that scares the hell out of you.
Right, but that is what they need.
But see, it's very hard. You've raised children, you know what this is like. How do you get a child to say, I'm responsible? Okay, the kid always said, well, you're responsible, I'm not responsible, and the kid takes risks, the kid does crazy things. And then how many times have you turned to your child and said to them, what were you thinking? Right? What were you thinking? I mean, they don't think. That's the problem, because they've never been asked to think about that. They've never been asked to think about 2 steps ahead and how I'm going to deal with this, with the circumstances that I set in motion. You have to teach them, but it takes a very long, the question is, how do you teach them? That's where we're going to start back at page 432. All right, Douglas.
Even in the greatest experiment in democracy ever in this country,
Yeah.
it took us 100 years to figure out that it had to apply to all Americans, and a tremendous loss of life in a civil war. And then it took us another 100 years to discover what that meant to apply to all Americans. And we're one of the most advanced, we are the most advanced society in human history, and it took us 200 years to figure this out.
And more. We're not done. I don't know how many of you read the paper this morning, but like you said, like this morning, like, huh? I don't know what you said, but that's what I said this morning. Huh? Right? Listen. I'm not getting involved in these political rivalries. Not in Torah study, of course. What would Torah have to say to us? Never mind. Yeah, huh? Someone had a hand up. Yes, please, Marsh. That's what about page 432. That God's question, and exactly. All right, so first Jethro shows up. Jethro is Moshe's father-in-law. Right? Moshe has great experience leading sheep. Put a flock of sheep in front of him, he knows what to do. He has an MBA in sheep. Okay? But when it comes to leading a people, he's got no idea whatsoever. So his father-in-law, who's the head priest of Midian, he's the chieftain of Midian, comes along and says, what are you doing? You can kill yourself. And Jethro teaches him how to organize bureaucracy. Right? So in case you want to know who organized Jewish bureaucracy, it's Jethro. Anyone ever been stuck in the Israeli airport? It's Jethro's fault. First Jewish all right? Then what happens? Now we get into the real stuff. So look at page 436. Now we looked at this a previous time, so I'm going to just preface this with a literary note. This is a very hard chapter to read. This one and the next one. These are the core chapters of the Mount Sinai event. Mount Sinai is the place in which God begins the process of changing us as a people, of liberating the inside. That's what's missing from the litany, the narrative of Ki Tavo. This story of changing the inside of a people, of giving people a vision of what moral freedom is for, of the purpose and identity of this community, a moral purpose. Your purpose is not to conquer the world. I'm sorry to tell you that. Your purpose is not to own, to dominate, to commandeer, to possess. That's not your purpose. Other peoples in the world may interpret their purpose that way, but you have a different purpose. You have a particularly moral purpose in the world. Very strange people, you Jews, who walk around with this sense of moral purpose in the world. And this is where we begin to gain it. But here's the problem. The narrative is a mess. It's an absolute mess. It's repetitious, it's contradictory, there's full of non sequiturs, and you're going to ask me, what does this mean and why is it here? And there are many attempts, including by the traditional commentators. Rashi, for example, Rashi sat down with 2 colored highlighters And he redid the text. And in the Rashi's the 11th century French commentator, Rabbi Shlomo ben Yitzchak, okay? What Rashi does is he says, look, you can take out two different narratives here. And they're two very coherent narratives that have been smooshed together. So the question is, first of all, why are there different narratives? What are the burdens of these different narratives? What's the purpose of these different narratives? That's one question. The second question is, the Bible is exquisitely well edited elsewhere. Why is it so badly edited here? Why the chaos? Now you could say, all right, they were in a hurry. They were trying to get it done. No. This has to be on purpose for some reason. The chaos of the narrative is trying to create an impression. Anybody remember their wedding day? The first one. If you sit down with, if you want to have a fight, sit down with your spouse and trade memories of your wedding day. The reason you'll have a fight is because one of you will say, you don't remember anything, do you? No, I remember it perfectly, like yesterday. You were wearing this, and this one was standing there, and this one did this. No! That was your family. My family. And you end up with, because everybody, it's all a mushy thing, because the most important moments of life get all mushed up in our heads. They get all confused, right? The day your first kid was born, right? The day of your kid's bar mitzvah. The important days of your life are hard to remember because the emotions are so powerful that there's a chaos in the way that you organize your memories. And then you reorganize them according to things that happen later. So what happens, I'm going to suggest to you that that's the purpose of the chaos. The reason why the narrative will be so hard to read is because it's trying to convey the fact that the events themselves were difficult to absorb when they were happening and difficult to remember after they happened. And the narrative matches that kind of chaotic memory. What we're going to see are there's different layers of text here, and we can actually tease them out. And as we tease them out, we can see that there's different burdens, different ideas about what happens when you meet the truth. When you meet the ultimate truth of your existence, what happens at that point? Do you walk toward it or do you walk away from it? The moments of greatest power in life, do we walk toward them or do we walk away from them? Are they moments of attraction or repulsion? That's going to be the question. All right, everybody good so far? Buckle your seatbelt. Here we go. On the third day, on the third new moon after the Israelites had gone forth from the land of Egypt, on page 436 of chapter 19, on that very day, they entered the wilderness of Sinai. Having journeyed from Rephidim, they entered the wilderness of Sinai, and they encamped in the wilderness. Israel encamped there in front of the mountain. Neged Hahar. So the Torah assumes what? That you know which mountain it is. Why do you know which mountain it is? Right, because everybody knows that mountain. Because everybody knows that's the holy mountain. Because that's well known in the world. Not just to Jews, by the way, to Midianites and everybody else. That's the holy mountain. Or if you really want to be homiletical about this, everyone has a mountain like that in their life. That's your mountain. You camp in front of your mountain. That's the mountain of your truth, right? And then you can have some more fun and ask, why a mountain? But that's another story. And Moses, Moshe Allah El Ha-Elohim. Just wham! Moses went up to God. Really? What the hell does that mean? Vayikra elav Adonai. And God called to him from the mountain. But you just told me he went up to the mountain, so why is God calling him to the mountain? And here, if you want to follow one suggestion, and this is not even a new suggestion, it's an ancient suggestion. Whenever you see the name Elohim, that's one narrative. And whenever you see the name Adonai, that's the different narrative. And if you separate those two, that's why you need two colored markers to read Torah. Put one in red and one in blue, right, or yellow and purple, and you'll see that they end up with actually different narratives that are smushed together. God called to him from the mountain, saying, "Thus you shall say to the house of Jacob and declare to the children of Israel, you have seen what I did to the Egyptians, how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to me. Now, if you obey me faithfully and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession among all the peoples. Indeed, all the earth is mine, but you will be Mamlechet Kohanim V'Goy Kadosh, a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Stop for a minute. Kingdom of priests, holy nation. What is a priest? What is the function of a priest in a tribe, in a community? He's a leader, he's a teacher. What else does a priest do? What? He's a prophet, okay? Meaning what? What does he do? What's the function? He what? He's the link with God. The priest is the one who connects you with the divine. What else does a priest do? You might not see this as obvious, but in the ancient world, the priest connected you with your history. The priest was the one who was responsible for maintaining the genealogies of all the families in the community. So he is your connection with the divine, with the ultimate. He's also your connection with your identity from your past. He's the one who embodies the real internal life of the tribe, the collective life of the tribe. That was Durkheim. The collective life of the tribe is invested in the priest. The priest sort of wears the flag of the tribe. Okay? Now, what does it mean that you're a nation of priests? What a priest does to a tribe, you Israelites will do for humanity. What will be your function in the world? We'll go through each one of those functions again, right? You will lead, but not lead materially, not lead politically. You will lead morally. You will remind humanity, as a priest reminds a tribe of its ultimate purposes in the world, you will remind humanity of its ultimate purposes in the world. You will remind humanity of its moral capacities, of its capacities to grow and to change. You will be their conduit to the eternal and the absolute. You are to be in the world what a priest is in the tribe. Now, in order to function as a priest in a tribe, what does a priest take on him or herself? A set of restrictions. Priests are allowed to only marry certain people, eat certain things, live in certain places, dress in certain ways. We expect a certain standard of behavior of the priest because that distinguishes the priest from the rest of us schleppers. And because the priest's purity, however that purity is interpreted in that particular tribe, represents the highest level of the tribe's moral aspirations. The priest takes on these restrictions in order to say, not only am I different, but I am what you ought to be looking for. You know this because you expect rabbis to abide by a certain moral standard that's higher than the rest of us, right? If I dressed and talked and acted, when I do dress and talk and act like the rest of you, you say, oh, isn't it cute? The rabbi's human. So I love running into kids at Menchie's because I go to Menchie's all the time. Shul, Menchie's, and home. Those are the three holy places in my life, right? You know, first of all, it's Menchie's, so it's, it's human, right? And so little kids go, oh, the rabbi eats ice cream. Yes.
A kid saw me in the grocery store.
Yeah.
Rabbi Gilman,
Yes.
what are you doing here?
Right.
I looked at him, I said,
I've come to bless the soup, right?
I looked at him, I said, I ate all the Torahs, and I was still hungry.
Ooh. I told you this story. My first week as a rabbi in Texas, this is a true story. First week as a rabbi, Nina sent me to the Tom Thumb supermarket. And there's a little 3-year-old kid in a shopping cart. And he's one of my kids at my school. I was the school principal. And he said, oh, Mom, look, it's God. So I put him on the board of directors, No, but see, he's not wrong. I mean, he's not wrong in the sense that the person who teaches you God functions as a conduit to the eternal, functions as a conduit to the absolute. And you want that person to be somewhat separated from the normal flow of life. You don't want them embedded in the normal flow of life, and you want them to behave in a manner and symbolize something different. So that's what the priest does. That's you. This is the job description of the Jewish people, at least in the way that Exodus imagines it. Now, that changes the whole purpose of the liberation, by the way. Just a second. The liberation from Egypt is not just so you could get out of Egypt and return home and plant your fields and sit under your vines and fig trees. No. God has a job for you. You have a purpose in the world. You have a serious purpose in the world. That's why I liberated you. Yes, please.
Is this where the
Something like it. That's going to be Isaiah. Isaiah is the prophet. He's going to use that idea first. He's going to use, yeah, a mamlechet kohanim v'goy kadosh. You're going to be an entire people who function to humanity in the way that a priest functions in a tribe. You have something to say to humanity, and you have to behave in a manner which is going to be distinctive from humanity, because I want you to say that. By the way, so that you should know, just as an outgrowth, there are many implications of this. One of the implications was drawn by the great philosopher Franz Rosenzweig, who said, this is the reason why we can't all go move to Israel. He was an anti-Zionist in the 20s. He says, we can't move to Israel because that violates our idea of what it means to be part of the nations of the world. Our diaspora, our exile, what some interpret as exile, he interpreted as our mission. You were sent into the world to say something to the world. And that's the reason why you shouldn't be all gathered in one country in the world, because that's not where God wants you. Now, that's not a very attractive idea anymore. Okay, but it's an interesting point. It's an interesting implication of this. The other implication is, by the way, is that maybe the world doesn't want to hear what you have to say, which puts you in a very difficult position, because nobody wants to be told they need to be more moral. And that puts you in a very precarious position. Ronnie, yes?
Our goal is tikkun olam.
Yes. Olam, the whole world. And it's interesting that tikkun and not conquest. I keep coming back to this because you read the mythology of other peoples and it's all about conquest and domination. Yours is not, and possession, acquisition. It's not yours. You have something to say to the world. All right, let's go on. Ready? These are the words.
You're going to pass by Eagle's Wings?
You want to go back to Eagle's Wings?
No, you got it.
Oh, ladies and gentlemen, Eagle's Wings. Go ahead. Go ahead. It's the super.
I'm in the Judean desert
Yes.
with the man
Yeah.
who won World War II,
Okay.
who happened to be a rabbi,
Who was the man who won World War II?
Nelson Glick.
Okay.
Nelson Glick was my teacher. I bothered him the way I bother you now.
Lucky guy.
He took me out of the, he pulled me into the draft. Nelson was the head of the OSS, the precursor of the CIA. And he was Indiana Jones. He was the model for the character. He was an archaeologist and a spy. And Nelson took me into the desert, and one day we see eagles flying, and he says, Kanfena Shari. It's in, so God says, I took you out on eagle's wings. What does that mean to you? And I said, it means God took us out on eagle's wings. He said, stupid. Look at what they do. Eagles nest on escarpments, on rocky escarpments to protect their eggs from predators, on cliffs. And so when the young try to fly, there's no place to experiment. So what eagles do with their eaglets is they knock them out of the nest, and they plummet to their certain depth, except that the mother eagle swoops down and on her pinion feathers knocks them up like ping pong, knocks them back up into the air, and they flap around and fall, and then she knocks them up back into the air and they fall. He said, that's the way we become free.
Nice. Very nice.
And that is what it means, I took you on eagle's wings.
Right.
It doesn't mean I embraced you so that you couldn't make a mistake, so that you wouldn't have freedom, so that you wouldn't have responsibility. It means I knocked you up into the air of civilization, and you have to find your way to fly. But don't worry, because when you fall, I will catch you.
That's
I'll knock you back up.
Can I have an amen? Can I have an amen?
Amen. Hallelujah, brother.
Thank you, Jesus.
No.
Rabbi, you made an assumption there.
Yeah.
When you fall, I will catch you. It's not that. It's the very opposite. When you fall, I will knock you back up until you
Well,
learn to
yeah.
fly. I'll keep knocking you. It's not
You're
like
going to get
that. It's not getting caught.
smacked back up until you figure this out, that it's your turn, right?
See, yours is spoken like a mother. Nelson, I'm going to knock you up. Nelson's was spoken like a guy who had
Right. Good. I like this. I like this.
There's two different ways of understanding.
Turn the page. Yeah, Mort, please.
In Shachos, we say a prayer
Yeah.
asking for a two-edged sword to attack princes of our non-believers.
Yes.
How is that considered?
That's a very good question. So, yeah, see, very wise question. So you got to be quiet. You got to, in Shachrit, go ahead.
We say a prayer asking for a two-edged sword to attack the princes of our non-believers.
Right. All over the tradition, you're going to hear words of tribal rage. Right. At the end of in the second half of the Haggadah, you go to the door. And when you open the door, what do you say? You say, "World, I have come to bring tikkun." Nope, not in the traditional Haggadah. In my Haggadah, yes, but in the traditional Haggadah, you say, "Shvach hamatcha lagoyim." Dear God, pour your wrath on the nations of the world. Right? You find this all over. So what do you have? Again, the Jewish tradition is a symphony, and you have to listen to the melodies and the counter melodies, the points and the counterpoint, the contrapuntal melody. So you have this melody here. You are Mamlechet Kohanim Goy Gadosh. You are the kingdom of priests and the holy nation. That melody we talked about a couple of weeks ago, this notion of you were crossing the Red Sea, and you got to the other side of the Red Sea, and you all started singing and dancing when you saw the Egyptians dead. And then God in heaven sees the angels singing and dancing, and God says to the angels, "Shah, my creatures are drowning in the sea, and you're dancing and singing." There is a universalism. There is a moral elevation. There is a sense repressing the tribal and raising the sense of a moral solidarity with all of humanity. Abraham appeals not for his own mishpacha. Abraham appeals for a bunch of wretched strangers in Sodom and Gomorrah who ended up trying to rape his nephew. But he appeals for them. Why? Because his job is to do mishpat and tzedek. His job is to do justice and righteousness in the world. That, I think, I could interpret, at least for my own sanity, is the leitmotif, the main melody of the Jewish symphony. Then we have a contrapuntal melody, an underneath melody, a harmony, or disharmony actually, of tribalism, of real good, hardcore tribalism. Now, I think that tribalism is a result of our history. When you beat a people and beat a people and beat a people down, eventually they're going to begin to develop their own defenses, and this tribalism is their defense. And one of the defenses is, Shvach hamatcha lagoyim. God, avenge us. Destroy this horrible world. It's the rage of the tribe. The rage of the tribe. So you have these two melodies, and they go through Jewish history at the same time, right? One is a melody intended to defend us against the destructions of the world, because we're a small and very weak people. And the other, I think, is this beautiful moral vision. And the question is, when do you listen to one and when do you listen to the other? And if my father's here, he'll tell you that that's exactly the question that animates domestic and foreign policy in Israel right now. There's 60,000 African refugees in South Tel Aviv, and the Israeli government doesn't know what the hell to do with them. And right now, they decided that they can't keep them there. They've kept them there for 10 years, and they're trying to get rid of them. They don't know what to do, and there's huge protests going on. And you have the question of the survival of the tribe or the survival of the moral mission of the tribe. And sometimes they contradict, and that's the melody. How do I preserve myself? I want to be a moral actor in the world, but I don't want to get killed doing it. Okay? That's not our religion. Those are the guys across the street. Martyrdom is not something to aspire to. Kiddush Hashem in the sense of how you behave in the world, but not giving up your life. So the question is, how do I preserve my own being in the world, my own place in the world, and at the same time continue this moral mission? That's a very interesting question, Mort. So you're going to find both melodies going through Jewish history, and you got to know when to listen to the one and when to listen to the other. And sometimes we listen to the wrong one. Sometimes we become a little bit too morally generous in a world that's very dangerous, right? And the other time, sometimes we become a little morally constricted, not a lot morally constricted, because there's something very satisfying about that tribal. There's something very sort of humanly, instinctually tribal, satisfying about that tribal us, them. And you got to be careful about this. This is part of what we have to do. This is why you have a prophetic voice in the tradition, because the prophetic voice warns us about adopting the wrong narrative. Dr. Bronzer.
Until recently, we had nothing to do except to shout.
Right. Right.
For millennia.
Right. And now we have power, a great deal of it. And the question is, what did we learn from all those centuries of powerlessness about the conduct of power, right? How do you use power as a tool of morality, protecting the tribe, but understanding that the tribe has a moral vision in the world? This is the great question of Zionism, the great question of Jewish sovereignty, right? And God has such a wicked sense of humor. Because if God had put us in some isolated South Sea island where no one ever bugged us, it would not be a dilemma. If we had been on the island of, I told you, my Hawaiian island, Alavai, Maui, Kauai, Lanai, Alavai. And we never would have been. But where did God put us? In the world's worst neighborhood. Because if we're going to find out whether you know how to listen to which voice, we're going to put you in the one neighborhood in the world where you'll have no rest ever. Never. Not one moment of rest. There hasn't been one moment of peace since the state of Israel was declared. Not one moment when they could stand down. I got a friend whose kid's in the Modi'in in intelligence. And I asked him, you ever get leave? He says, yeah, I get leave. He says, but even when I'm on leave, I carry two telephones. He said, one's from my mother and one's from my commanding officer. And you ever turn them off? No. No, never. I mean, think about this for a minute. This is a 19-year-old kid. He happens to be really bright. And he watches a computer monitor which monitors the flow of cell phone traffic over Syria. And he does this 23 hours a day for a week. Then he goes on leave for a couple of days and gets some sleep and comes home. His mother's, I said, what does he do? He sleeps and he eats a lot, Then he goes to see his girlfriend, then he goes back to work. I mean, it's just this is what we've done. This is who we've raised. And because God has this wicked sense of humor, we're going to find out if you know how to be morally progressive in the world's worst neighborhood. Anybody can be morally progressive in Woodland Hills. No, I'm saying it's easy. Listen, I'm a centrist in politics. But I recognize that it's really easy to be morally progressive on Densmore Avenue because there hasn't been an invasion on Densmore in many years. But if I'm Benjamin Netanyahu, or if I'm this 19-year-old kid watching the cell phone traffic over Syria, wondering which of those messages is the call message for the terrorists to launch the missiles, because he's going to be the kid who hears it first. And he's going to be the kid who pushes the button that gives Haifa and Kiryat Shmona and Tzfat the 5 minutes to hit the miklat, to run to the miklat before the Hezbollah missiles start falling. It's a little harder to be morally progressive under those circumstances. You see but that's the question. That's exactly the question. This is the contrapuntal melody of Jewish survival. How the hell did we get onto that? Why do you do this?
Got 3 minutes to do the
I know, I got the
nice 3 freaking minutes. And then there's the 10 Commandments. See you next week.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Don't forget, don't kill, don't commit adultery, don't steal, don't, come back next week whole. Right. All right, let's just do 2 more lines. Look on page 438, the next page. I want to get to one point. I haven't gotten to the beginning yet. Moses came and summoned the elders and put before them all that God had said. And the people answered as one, saying, Call asher diber Adonai Naaseh. This is the end of the Torah. If I were writing this as a movie, roll credits. Quick, before anything else happens. Yes, we buy it. Whatever you want. Kosher, no problem. Shabbos, you got it. Yontif, 2 days. Why just 1 day? Right? You know, we'll take an extra day Pesach, right? Because we just love matzah. By the 8th day, you really love matzah. Right? This is it. They said, we'll do it. It's done. Now look at the next line. Really? Really, you'll do it? It's done? Look at what God says. Moses brought back the people's words to the Lord. So he goes to God and he says, they said yes. They buy it. They signed. Right? Done. Right? So I always love that moment in a wedding when the groom signs the ksuba, right? You ever go to a wedding and I turn to the kid and I say, are you prepared to make this promise to Soraleah? Kid says yes. And you promise everything you have in the world forever to fulfill this promise? Kid says yes, and sign here. He signs. Done. We don't need the flowers. Take away the flowers. Take away the sushi, right? Because he said yes. That's what we're waiting for. Girls always say yes. It's the boys who never say yes, right? Except not so fast, because you know what happens? Even God understands. You're in no position to make that promise. You're not ready to make that. You're slaves. You always said yes. Slaves always say yes, right? That's what you were trained to say. I want to find out if you'll say yes as free people. That's harder. Free people have the capacity to say no. You haven't learned that yet, right? So what does God say? And the Lord said to Moses, I'll tell you what, let's try some special effects. I will come down to you in a thick cloud in order people may hear when I speak with you and trust you ever after. Right? We got to do something to impress this upon them so they get an idea. Right? So then Moses reported the people's words to the Lord again. You see how crazy this narrative is? And God says, don't let them get too close to the mountain. So turn the page. No, go to the bottom of the next page. On the third day, page 439. Ready? On the third day, the morning dawned, there was thunder and lightning, a dense cloud upon the mountain, a very loud blast of the horn, and all the people were in the camp trembled, and Moses led the people out of the camp toward God. What a statement. I mean, just what does that mean? Toward God. Yeah, he's been leading us ever since. I mean, that's what the Torah is about. But we're going to go to the mountain. And they took their places at the foot of the mountain. The Hebrew is batachtit har, which means Pshat, the literal meaning is by the foot of the mountain, but there's a tradition that says it means underneath the mountain. So there's a wonderful tradition that says God held the mountain up over to people and said, "Nu, you want my covenant?" And we very wisely said, "Okay, sure," right? And the idea is that you got to understand that this is a life and death commitment. Now the mountain was all in smoke, for the Lord had come down on it in fire. This now gets really just crazy, right? And the smoke rose like a kiln, and the whole mountain trembled violently, and the blare of the horn grew louder and louder. And Moses spoke, and God answered him in thunder. So what's going on is very unclear here. And the Lord came down on top of the mountain. Very unclear. Because the Bible really isn't interested so much in the experience. It's very unclear. In one narrative, the people come closer. In one narrative, they retreat back. In one narrative, God is speaking to Moses and Moses to the people. In the other narrative, God never speaks to the people, just to Moses. Because at the end, the people are going to say, don't let that happen again. We're too scared. And now we get to Rabbi Gelman's right. We got 3 minutes to do the Ten Commandments. Now watch something in the Ten Commandments. Do two things about the Ten Commandments. On chapter 20, right? Ready, chapter 20? God spoke all these words. To whom? To the people or to Moses? It's a little unclear, you see? And he said, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, the house of bondage. You'll have no other gods besides me. What grammatical person is that in? First, second, or third? That's in the first person. Me. No other gods before me. Everybody got that? Right. You'll not make for yourselves a sculptured image or any image of what is in heaven or above and earth below. You'll not bow down to them. For I, the Lord your God, am an impassioned God, visiting guilt upon parents and kindlech, and showing kindness to those who love me and keep my commandments. What grammatical person is that? First. Now look at the next one. You'll not swear falsely by the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not clear one who swears falsely by his name. Third. What happened? Wait a minute. It's first person or third person? It's all being directed to them. That's the second. But you'll notice that in the first two commandments, as it were, God talks about himself as me. Starting with this one, it's him. Look at the next one. Remember the Sabbath day, keep it holy. 6 days you'll do your work, right? For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth and rested. He rested on the seventh day. What grammatical person is that? Third. So what happens is the first two commandments are in first person, and the next 8, depending on how you count it, are in third person, leading many of the traditional commentators to wonder if God said all this stuff to the people, or if God only said the first two commandments to the people. Okay? And left Moses to fill in the details. So now come back with me for a minute. What would that mean? What would that mean? I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, the house of bondage. You'll have no other gods. You'll not make for yourselves an image. You will not bow down to them or serve them. For I, God, am impassioned, and I show kindness to those who love me and keep my commandments. That's the covenant.
The only sin is idolatry.
The only sin is idolatry. But idolatry has many forms. Because what is idolatry? Idolatry is not when you bow down to a rock or a tree. Nobody worships